Hello everyone, and my name is Ian Hayden-Smith, and I'd like to welcome you to the craft of editing comedy and drama, which is part of BAFTA Television, The Sessions, which is supported by TCL, and many thanks to TCL for the support of this. This virtual series celebrates some of the nominees and nominated programs from this year's Virgin Media British Academy Television Awards and the British Academy Television Craft Awards. And just before we get going with our guests, we do have a few housekeeping points. These events are part of BAFTA's learning work to share expertise from television, film and games with audiences far and wide. And if you want to find out more about this, go to BAFTA.org and BAFTA's social channels for details of activities and news. You can also join the conversation on social media using hashtag BAFTA TV Sessions. There's going to be closed captioning available for the whole event. And if you go to the bottom of your screen, you can turn on the button there. And Dana is going to be doing closed captioning for us today. And finally, if you have a question, there is also another button at the bottom of your screen. And you can join us in about 55 minutes of time. And I'll be having a conversation for that time with our guests. Then we'll open up to about 20 minutes with Q&As from you. And our guests today are the editing nominees who have helped create an incredible, extraordinary body of work over the course of the last year. And they are Dan Crinnion, who has been nominated for Killing Eve, Elen Pierce Lewis for Giri, Haji, Gary Dollner for Fleabag, and Simon Smith, who with Jinx Godfrey has been nominated for Chernobyl. So first of all, welcome everyone.
Hello.
Goodbye.
Hi there, and it's good to have a dog present as well for one of these events. I'm going to start nice and easy with just a question about how you individually became involved with your project. And perhaps, Dan, we can start with you first of all. Your relationship with Killing Eve goes back to series 1. Can you talk about how you first became involved and how your role has developed?
He's gone to look.
He's gone.
Oh, he has gone. Okay. In that case, let's jump to Elen. With Giri, Haji, hi, by any standard.
Oh, he's back.
Let's stay with you anyway, Elen.
Okay. Yeah, good.
So by any standards, Giri Haji is quite a unique drama. Can you talk about your involvement across episodes 1 to 4 and then the final episode?
Okay, yeah. So basically, Julian introduced me to the project, Julian Farina, the director. He talked about the project, about Joe's script and how it was set in Japan, and it was a ripple effect of a murder between two cities, Tokyo and London, and it sounded incredible, and it sounded incredibly cinematic and lots of scale to it and breadth, and so I was really excited about it. And we'd worked together before. We'd worked on a series called Marvelous, and Julian, we worked really well together and collaborated really well together, and he likes to work with very intuitive people, and he also works with David Odd and the cameraman, the cinematographer, who was also Marvelous, and Giri Haji, and Adrian, the composer. So we were all kind of very much a team, and I was just really attracted to the project because of its scale as well. Yeah.
Okay, Dan, let's talk about how you became involved with Killing Eve, because your relationship with this production goes back to series 1, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. I'm sort of very lucky to have been involved in actually all 3 series so far. So the first series I cut episode 4, which was the chase through the countryside. So I only did 1 episode, and Gary obviously did episodes 1 and 2. I then got, after doing it, I loved it, had a great time. Obviously, you know, extraordinary show to work on. I thought that was my lucky time. And then I very fortunately got a call back out of nowhere, and they asked that they had a young Swiss director called Lisa Brulman, who literally had come out of film school that I had discovered. And they said, we'd like you to meet her. We came along and sort of got along straight away, really. She's just this, I don't know how to describe her, this wonderfully brilliant, genius, intuitive sort of person, and we got on very well. And she went off and she did episodes 3 and 4, which was the first bit of TV she did a bit of professional television she had done. And I just got lucky because she was just a natural, really. And yeah, so we cut 3 and 4, and everyone kept coming in asking, is it all right, is it all right? And I kept saying, she's doing amazingly. And yeah, so I was very lucky to get on the job again.
So Gary, it's been interesting to look at your previous work, which includes stints on a comedy series from Brass Eye to Alan Partridge, The Thick of It to Veep. You've edited all but one of the 2 series of Fleabag. And I'm kind of guessing it's your strong sensibility towards original comedy that probably played a key role in your involvement.
Yeah, they shot and cut the pilot, and then Harry came in as a director, and they were searching around for an editor, and I saw the pilot and thought it was fantastic, a really original piece of work, and went for the interview, and luckily for me, they said yes, and so we got going on series 1, and it was great. We had a really good connection in the cutting room, and thankfully for me, I've been hanging on to Phoebe's coattails ever since, really. So we went on and did, like Dan mentioned, the opening block of first series of Killing Eve, and then we did the second series of Fleabag. So.
And Simon, you and Jigs worked separately on 2 episodes each of Chernobyl before collaborating on the final episode. Actually, can you talk about your reaction on first reading the script and then how you became involved?
The scripts, for me, like at that stage of my career, I still, wasn't getting loads and loads of scripts. So it was definitely the best script I'd ever read. Absolutely like captivated from episode 1 to episode 5, and desperately wanted to be involved and to do it. My opportunity, my chance to meet for the project came, like, the director Johan Renck had a few years ago made a series called The Last Panthers, which I thought was amazing. That was edited by a guy called Luke Dunkley. Luke was, wanted for Chernobyl. He was asked and probably should be sitting here right now, but I owe Luke Dunkley an awful lot. I was his assistant for many years, and when Luke wasn't available, he recommended me to Johan, which got me my interview, really. And yeah, then every day I just said to myself, don't mess it up. Don't mess it up. Don't mess it up.
Something that when I was asked to come on and chat with you all about your nomination and your work on these programs, it struck me that even though they're all incredibly different, what they have in common is the creation of these complete, total universes. And I just got this sense that it feels like everyone on the team for each of the shows is pulling in the same direction. I'm just curious, from your perspective, each of you, what directives did you receive from directors, producers, and execs for the show? And perhaps, Gary, we'll start with you with Fleabag.
Well, look, because we sort of bonded over series 1, and again, Harry, who was the director, directed the opening block of Killing Eve, so we had that process where we, connected again. And when Phoebe was ready to go with season 2 of Fleabag, it was like just getting the band back together, really, because there's an intuition that's going on in the cutting room, and I'm sure the other guys will back me up when you've got like a shorthand. Because if you've got to sit in a room with someone, in a very small room with someone for quite a long time, they can sort of we get on each other's nerves, but it's nice to have that relationship where, maybe you don't get on each other's nerves as much as you can do, and you've got shorthand for stuff, and there's trust. And so all those things are such a big thing in terms of, I think, a successful relationship in a cutting room. So we'd already built those foundations, really, when it came to season 2. And, I think, I don't know, Phoebe said it, time and time again, the group of people that I worked with, I mean, I would love to hang out with them every day. They're genuinely, not only are they creatively brilliant people, but you know, they're just a bunch of fun to be with, you know. So it's like the idea of going to work and being with people that you love being around and you really respect their judgment is, you know, that's the dream, isn't it?
And Ellen, what about you? Not just working with series creator and writer Joe Barton, but also directors Gillian Farino and Ben Chesil, as well as the producers. Could you talk about sort of your role and how you navigated?
Yeah, it was quite interesting, Giri, Haji, because we had a long shoot. I mean, we started in the July 2018, and we shot in various different, well, they started in London, and then they went to Tokyo, and then they came back and did some studio stuff, and then the second block started, which Ben Chesil did fantastically. But a lot of the time I was in the cutting room by myself for a very long time, assembling at least the first four, a little bit of the next block, but not so much because then Matthew Taven came on, it was fantastic. Julian, when I did Marvelous with him, because quite a lot of, when you edit these days, the producers and the execs want to see, at the end of every week, they want to see scenes they shot that week. And it's so that on a Friday, you're madly scrambling around trying to put all the scenes together to show assemblies to the execs. And I remember on Marvelous, Julian said, I don't want to see anything. I just don't want to see anything until after the shoot. Like, okay. So like you've got 43 weeks or something of shoot and nobody's seen anything. But actually we did have a break because they shot the London stuff, and before they went to Tokyo, I said, look, come in to the cutting room in Soho and we'll have a look at what we've got so far for the first 4 episodes so you can see, you know, because it's all about tone. I don't know about you guys, but, you know, setting the tone, especially with a new series. So I was quite keen for him to come in and look at some stuff. And and he was pretty happy, but none of the Tokyo stuff was in there. None of the Japanese stuff was in there. You know, there's a lot of trust, especially because, you know, on Marvelous it was a bit scary, and then on Giri Haji I was like, okay, so he trusts me with getting the right performances and finding the right bits of drama and making the story work. So I think, yeah, it's very important. Trust.
You've raised some points there that we'll come back to in a short while, but Dan, continuing the success of Killing Eve was one thing, and the expectations on the series is so high. But what's really interesting with the second series is also this desire, it seems, to offer something new, and in many ways that it becomes more expansive. Could you talk about the conversations that led into the second series and what they felt that you were going to bring with the editing?
I think actually the expense of basically what I would say is Sid, you know, Sally and Lee and everyone involved. I think the rule of thumb was don't be afraid of everything, and I think that was a hangover, a nice hangover from the first series or season. So we came. You come to a show like that with no fear, and because it's such an encouraging environment to do that, what I was armed with come the second series. I mean, I did one, and you know, we were watching, like I said, we talked before with Gary about watched him in 1 and 2 and what he was doing, music and play, and we just recognised that there was a platform to try and experience everything. And when the scripts came in for 2, what you recognise is they were trying to be bold and you know, you've got to try and get a thing where you're creating, you want to keep going what Killing Eve is, but you want to move it forward, you want to keep changing and just take risks. And I thought, you know, especially with Amsterdam, I thought it was as a script, it was a risk, you know, and they all, but instead of being scared of that, everyone seemed to be quite delighted with that. And once you're in that environment where you're safe to play, then it becomes joyous. So you can mess around with music, you mess around, you know, it's all those sort of aspects where you're allowed to play, and you don't get knocked down for it. If something goes wrong, everyone goes, okay, well, that didn't work out, did it? And, you know, everyone's honest, but in a nice way. And yeah, every time they're happy for people to take risks and ask you to take risks. Sometimes it don't come off, but if you create that environment, then it's a wonderful place to work and to, you know, to play with. And I think Lisa embraced that as well as the director and took that to and ran with it. She wasn't scared, and as a result, you're not scared in the cutting room. So yeah, it was wonderful, and is wonderful. It's continued into the third series. So yeah.
And Simon, I guess what's interesting with Chernobyl is not just making the most of a drama that Craig Mazan's created, but you also have, in many ways, the weight of the debt that's owed to reconstructing tragic events.
Yeah, it's funny when we first met about it and discussed the project, they didn't really give me any like filmic references. What they gave us was this website, which was like their very own homemade Wikipedia of Chernobyl, for us all to go away and read all of these, first-person testimonies and stories, and watch these video clips of archive footage from the disaster itself and from the fallout of the disaster itself. There was one book called Voices of Chernobyl, I think, which is a lot of first-person testimony. A lot of Ludmilla, who's one of the main characters, it's got her story in there. So that's what we were given as our reference. Their focus on the realism of it, their focus on, we didn't have to make anything bigger. The horror of it was all already there. The only one film that they did tell me that I had to watch was the Russian war film Come and See.
Oh, yeah. I knew you were going to say that.
Before I even said it.
Klimov.
It's so amazing, that film. They did a 4K restoration, even since we started on Chernobyl. So if anyone hasn't seen that,
the sound is amazing. It's just the sound
is amazing. Time to go back and visit that film and learn from that film. So we were definitely guided by the real stories, the archive, the documentary. I do reckon that I've in terms of researching for this, watched my assistants got it all into the Avid, so every frame of archive that we could find, we made sure that we'd watched that and taken that in.
It's interesting that you mentioned Elen Klimov's film Come and See, because that in itself is based on a first-person remembrance of the time during the Second World War. But what fascinates me about that film is that I know Klimov set out not to make a war film. He wanted to tell the story of these people. Yeah, but even I never think of it as a war film. I think of it as the story of these people. And likewise, Chernobyl, it could have easily been a disaster movie, but it's not a disaster story. It is the story of these people. And there are commonalities between that film and this series on that level, that everything in this series is the human drama, not the explosions, not the kinetics of what actually happened.
Yeah, I think actually when I read the script and when I had my interview, one of the things I went in and said is, God, this script does feel like a war film, in that it's got the unseen enemy, it's got the rallying of the real men and women, the citizens, of whether they're the firemen, the miners, the divers in episode 2. So I did feel that it didn't feel like a disaster film. It felt more like a war film, but then I'd suppose more like a war film like Come and See, that has that kind of tragedy and devastation and sadness to it.
Just coming to the logistics of things, and Ellen, I know you've touched on this slightly. I'm curious to know from each of you how much time you roughly had to edit each episode. So perhaps, Ellen, we'll start with you.
Well, yeah, like I mentioned before, it was quite a long shoot, and there's various stages of it. And so we had studio, and we had the rooftop dance scene in 8, spoiler, and also a dance scene in 4, actually, were a choreographed Battle of Soho. And they were all shot at different times, so it was very hard to kind of blend, because I think initially Julian and I wanted to actually assemble quite a lot of the episodes before locking them, because there's a pressure now to lock each episode. Lock meaning, most people would know this, but lock meaning, you know, saying, oh, that episode's finished, and then the next episode's finished. And there's a pressure to write 4 weeks to lock. So you cut the episode, you have 2 weeks with the director, or maybe a week with the director, and then you have a couple of weeks where you show it to the executive. But when it's one long big story and it's all very interwoven, it's very hard to kind of measure that. And every series is different. You know, every series has its different challenges. But sometimes because of financial reasons, it's constricted, you know, in terms of how much time you spend on each episode. And then episode 1, sometimes if it's the first of a new series, takes longer because you're setting the tone and the characters set up, and sometimes there's too much story, or there's not enough story. Certainly with Giri Haji, we some of the flashbacks were kind of spread over a few episodes, and we decided in the end to kind of just have the kind of noirish flashbacks happening earlier in the series, and then so that we could carry on with the characters and not always go back to those flashbacks and kind of do them earlier. I mean, Joe Barton's script was fantastically inventive, and there was so much there, but we, you know, yeah, it was a challenge, and it was a wonderful challenge. It was just fantastic, but not structured in a kind of, oh, we have to do this episode in 3 weeks and that episode in 4 weeks or whatever.
It's interesting that you mentioned choreography in the 4th episode with this gun battle in Soho. And I know Sam has just mentioned a filmic reference. I wonder if there was ever a conversation that went back to the sort of John Woo bullet ballets that he made in Hong Kong in the 80s
yeah,
and 90s.
Probably. Yeah. Oops. What did I do? I think so. I mean, I was watching quite a lot of Takenyo Kitano, you know, things like Sonatine and things that mix the violence with the humor. But I think Joe actually, he wanted the violence in that way in flinching, but then he didn't want to focus on it. You know, he wanted it to be about the characters. It was the same in the Battle of Soho. We had the scenes where it was very, very violent, but then now and again you'd have a character like Vickers, the American character, you know, sort of reacting to it really badly, and so it was all about the characters in the moments rather than, oh, here's a lot of gunshots and people being killed for no reason at all. It's just, yeah. And Julian was never into that kind of violence either, you know. But there is a lot of violence in it, but he didn't want it ever to feel gratuitous. So.
Gary, what about Fleabag in terms of the editing time that you had? But did it change from the first series?
Well, I think not massively, I have to say. I mean, one of the things there's a couple of things I'm very proud of with Fleabag is that at BAFTA there's no comedy section. So in order to get a very small half-hour show against these big boys and girls, you know, we're sort of fighting above our weight in a way with little flyweights against the heavyweights, you know, because they have bigger budgets and blah, you know. And also, you know,
there's 10 more questions on the Q&A since that you said that. Like, it went up from 11 to 22.
Yeah, I'm waving the comedy flag here, kid. And you know, series 1 was, you know, BBC Three commission, and as Ellen was referring to, we had a rolling delivery, and in a way that series 2 had a more of a story arc across the series than it was more episodic, I think, with 1. But the thing that I really am most proud of in 1 is obviously we had flashbacks that were alluding to, you know, what happened at the end of the first series, and I said at one point, I think we'd locked the first 2 episodes, and we got to episode 3 where we started to pepper some little sort of incidental flashbacks, and I just said, whoa, how am I supposed to know how much to give away, because we got a lock as we go along, and I want to get to 6 before, you know, I don't want to peak too early, so to speak, and also I want to give the audience, you know, a sense of, you know, intrigue. but we were committed to a role and delivery. So that's the thing that I'm most proud of in the first season. But,
I will say as well, you talk about comedy, but probably the headbutting sequence in episode 1 of series 2 is probably the one moment of violence amongst all these series that made me wince the most.
Oh, really?
Oh.
I suppose it was unexpected. I mean, you know, when you know you're tuning into Killing Eve, title sort of gives it away, that you're going to get some violence, you know.
Although I will say, Dan, that that headbutting sequence probably is very close to it. Is the pig sequence?
Oh, thank God for that.
In Amsterdam.
Good. Yeah. No, I'd go with the headbutting sequence first as well.
That was quite nice with that first episode. You know, when you read the script and you know that that's where you got to get to in about it was about 18, 20 minutes into the episode, you know, near the end, it just meant that you could, you know, coil the spring as tight as you could make it, because you knew that you had this, you know, cork popping moment that you could get to. So it was a case of, right, I'm going to wind this up as much as we possibly can, so that, because we know that we've got this sort of sense of, you know, release in more ways than one. So that was always something to sort of build to, as it were.
So Dan, let's talk about Killing Eve and the length of time that you had.
Well, we're very traditional in the sense it's a 5-week shoot, 7-week fine cut for 2 episodes, and you got to get it done, and you've got to. That's the lock. You know, you're dealing with, you know, getting it out to the guys in America. It's all very, 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 yeah, we're delivering it and we're getting it, you know. So, and coming into the first series of Killing Eve, I was paranoid because it was kind of one of the early biggest things I'd done, and I was desperately conscious that I would be on time and lock on time. You know, I was just wanted to do that, and did so, and I think I sort of ran with that. And what I learnt very
Never
quickly.
in doubt, Dan.
Sorry.
Never in doubt.
it's fine. But what I realised is that I'd have to be thinking slightly ahead in the assembly process, because if I wanted to have as much fun with the music and the way we play with it, it wasn't the case of assembly. I knew how much time I would be getting the other side, so I would be constantly thinking about what we wanted to do and play with music. So we played, you know, as Gary would testify, we play with music very early on in the edit, during the assembly and throughout, because it you know, in order to enjoy it, certainly in the edit, and to get the best value out of the tracks and stuff, you want to be working on it whilst it's during the fine cut. So I was very conscious of that time. So it meant that, yeah, I was always, the assembly period, I was always constantly thinking about the fine cut. It didn't feel a sort of very relaxing process, because I really wanted to be in a good place once we got to the fine cut, because I knew it would be fairly relentless.
And Simon, what about you with the time that you had? And obviously you, across the 5 episodes, that time was shared with Jinx.
Yeah. I mean, so because it was shared with Jinx, you know, Chernobyl was, compared to stuff that I'd worked on before, incredibly generous. So like Dan said, you would normally have, say, a 5-week shoot, and you would be editing through that shoot. We had a 20-week shoot for the 5 episodes. And it was all like cross-bordered, so they'd be shooting some scenes from episode 1 and some scenes from episode 5 in the one day, perhaps, right? But normally, as an editor, you'd be working on the 5 weeks of your shoot. I was working, and Jinx were working, while they were shooting all episodes. So we basically had twice as many editors, right? So like, because some days I'd come into work, I wouldn't have any scenes to cut because they were working all on scenes that Jinx was doing. So it felt like I had twice as much time in my week to what I would normally have. I'd have a day where I'd come in and I wouldn't have to, you know, catch up to camera what they were shooting that day. I could go back over the scenes that I'd already cut.
You did have twice as you did.
Literally, yeah. So it's a cheat. It's a cheat. So we had very generous, twice as much time to assemble as a regular show. And then, so that was a 20-week shoot. In total, I was on it for a year. like 12 months. So, you know, yes, it was a long time. Yes, I spent a lot of time cutting that show.
I want to ask you all about the role of editing with performance, because I think it's sometimes it's something that's not talked about. People talk about action in a scene, but there are scenes where the performance is enhanced through the editing. Brilliant performance originally that it is. And I was just wondering with each of you, if you could think of a specific scene. Dan, I want to start with you with Killing Eve, because you may say the Amsterdam scene, which is amazing because it's not just, it looks fantastic. It doesn't just play out as a superficial, showy scene. It is something that absolutely taps into the core of the character and builds towards this crescendo.
I'm just pleased you weren't going to ask me to say, have I sort of Jodie Comer and Sandra Oh, and I've sort of enhanced their performances in any way? Because quite frankly, because they're extraordinary. I think with the killing scene, there's a great Vanity Fair article about it that Lisa did about what that was about, and it was about sort of Villanelle's love letter to Eve, because she felt she was being ignored by Eve. So the idea behind that scene was, I mean, there are other things working on it on that level as well, is the idea of this guy who, you know, patrols the red light district and, you know, has treated women like meat all his life. And, you know, so there was that sort of metaphor of that about stringing him up and putting a mask on him because it's how he's viewed women all his life, and that sort of vengeance. But then there was this sort of playfulness of it being macabre, and we wanted it to be like almost like a weird carnival. And then that's what Lisa talked about. She said, I want it to be like a weird sort of carnival scene. And you had this faceless mask, you know, and if you ever want to wonder how good an actor Jodie Comer is, she can act with a mask on. Because I can remember the first bit of rushes as they were coming through, not only did Damien Bromley, sorry, I have to get it right. The DOP's pictures were coming through, and it was so beautiful and amazing looking, like this sort of, I don't know, this adult Willy Wonka sort of landscape. But we got the first shot where she sort of walks in and she's reacting to him. She does this little thing where she drops her shoulders as if she looks like and because she's so expressive, her character previously, and we've all got a grammar of her, you can almost see what she's doing underneath her masks. So we were onto a winner throughout, because all those things allowed us to create something which was weird and not of this world. And then we sort of had a quick thing about the music. I found that the music we found was, I told the guys on Fridays, but I have to say, years and years ago, there was an album called All Aboard, which we used to have kids' nursery rhymes on. Growing up as a kid, I had that. And Lisa had come back in and she said, well, we want it to be a carnival, you know, this carnival thing. I want something happy and light. I don't want anything dark. So I said, and I remembered Windmills from Amsterdam, which was on this All Aboard album. So we said, well, let's put that, why don't we try and put that behind? So we played that first, we thought it was amazing. But then we thought, well, this might be a bit obvious, so let's see if we can get it in Dutch. And our amazing music supervisor came up with this version sort of 3 days later, and we laid that underneath. And so, and I think a lot with Killing Eve, it's about throwing people one way and thinking it's cartoonish, it's this, that, and the other. And then at the last minute, you throw something else in, which is, again, in this space, is him pleading with Villanelle. And she's even more scary when the fact that she doesn't, you know, it's just this faceless creature, and he's losing out. And then that's the point where you sort of, the performance, you then snap into, okay, it's reality now, and this is dark, and it's, you know, and that's the joy and the harder thing of cutting Killing Eve, is you've got humor, drama, everything sort of working at once, and striking that balance is tricky. So yeah, but when you get the materials right and everything's right, it wasn't, you know, it wasn't the trickiest scene to cut in that episode for me. It was just, you sort of dream about stuff like that, really.
Ellen, we've already talked about the fact that how many disparate elements are brought together throughout the whole of the 8 episodes of Giri Haji. I was just wondering, is there a specific moment involving the relationship between the performance and editing that you were particularly proud of?
Oh, okay.
Just one.
Sure. I don't know, there were a lot of moments. I mean, it was quite an eclectic sort of script, so there was a lot of moments that we worked really hard on bringing the characters out. But I think for me, the biggest thing was that a lot of it was in Japanese. And I think that when you're, as an editor, I think all editors, the performance is so important to them about how they cut the scene and how they understand how the characters feel and how it's put together. And I think that at the beginning I was like, oh my gosh, it's in Japanese. How am I going to do that? How am I going to understand what these people are really feeling and really thinking? And I don't speak Japanese, but I am bilingual, and I think it really helped, because I think being bilingual is I would say that you're slightly empathetic and you see different perspectives. And I think that when you're editing as well, I think you have an instinct, and I think that the instinct is still there even if the language is not. And that's, sometimes the beauty of cutting mute scenes is that there's a rhythm there without even having to use the dialogue as a rhythm. And also it did help that the cast were incredibly respectful of Joe's script and stuck to the lines, so I knew exactly what they were saying at any given time. But a lot of the time I didn't have any translation, so not until the end. And then a fantastic translator called Joe Allen came into the cutting room, and we all, she watched the episodes, and I said to her, what's important for me is not whether they're saying their lines right, it's whether you believe them, whether you believe what they're saying, and emotionally you believe them. And it's because there was a big chunk of one that was in Japanese, and then there was the lovely scenes with Yuto in episode 4, where you saw the development of his character and his love story. And yeah, so it was tricky, but it was, and I also had to subtitle all the rushes myself. But by doing that, I really got to know the performances, because I watched everything over and over again. And yeah, it really helped. And also the use of subtitles is really interesting, because when you're, it's where you put the subtitles and when you put the subtitles, because sometimes it can spoil like a joke, or it can tell you information a bit too early if the subtitle comes on too early. So that was interesting.
Can I ask a quick question on that? Ellen, did you utilise that as a dramatic tool then sometimes?
Yes, we did,
yeah.
Definitely. There was a lovely scene at the beginning in episode 1 where, in fact, I think Joe insisted on this, and I think it was a really good thing that he did. And I think it was where Kenzo goes in and talks to Taki. It was when we first meet Taki, and it's their relationship, and I love that scene. It's quite a low-key scene, and I think there was I can't exactly remember what he said, but there was a pause in the subtitle that helped us understand a bit of their relationship. And so
that's great though, because I think sometimes that is something that's overlooked in dramas and films that employ subtitles, is that they can be used in an expressive way themselves.
Yeah.
Not just to give people information or exposition.
Exactly. And also, and I think the important thing for Giri Haji is that on top, even though that there was, the Japanese culture and the English culture and the languages, it was all about the connections rather than how different we are. So it was all about everything is connected. And I think that in episode 4, that's what happens in the big montage scene in the Battle of Soho, is that, and there's kind of all sorts of different voiceovers going on, but it's all about how all these characters are all connected by time. There's a ripple in the pond and they're all connected, and everyone's sort of moved around by the hands of God, which was a line which we had to take out, unfortunately, because it was a scene we took out at the beginning of episode 4, because there was one too many things in episode 4 that we had to just take the beginning off. But there was a scene about we're all in the hands of the gods, and that's what we wanted the whole sequence in episode 4. Joe particularly wanted it to be about, the hands of the gods on everyone, and how, so sorry. talking too much.
No. Oh, no, it's fascinating. And Simon, with Chernobyl, I mean, there's so many elements that I'd be curious to know about in terms of editing and character. A key one in the final episode is the way that the editing is used with Jared Harris's presentation of the findings, his character's presentation, which for me, we've had the action tension throughout of what actually happens, but here you have the tension building up of this man who is reaching a point where his conscience is going to come into play.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not just even a scene, is it? It's the whole episode is that testimony, I guess, that Legasov is giving. And, you know, I think he had something like 20 pages of script, like, to just stand there and give himself. And it was split between both Jinx and I, or it was one of those that Jinx did several passes on some scenes, I did some, and then we'd swap them over, and then we'd intercut bits and bobs, and then later on we're getting notes through. One question that as editors we get a lot is, how did you edit that scene? Right, that is an obvious question to ask. But going back to what you said earlier about how long were we on it, I was on this for a year. That scene we were cutting more or less for a year. You know, we got the rushes in. I was still working on that scene a year later. Editing is an iterative process. Editing is not something you do once with a scene and it's done. You keep re-looking at that. You keep putting that in the context of all the other scenes. You keep fine-tuning it. You keep trying other things out. So like advice that I would give and go by myself is always to keep trying things, you know, and also to trust in the process, because sometimes the first time you do it, it's terrible, you know, and you've got to be comfortable and not beat yourself down over that's just part of the process. It's going to be terrible. It's terrible until it's brilliant, right? So you just have to keep going with it. Someone's barking. On that bit of on that episode of Chernobyl, it was labored over and worked on, and it wasn't just the editors at all either. Like, it goes to the director for their input, and then it goes to the producers for their input, the writer for his input, the execs for their input. It's a long process to edit these things.
I want to stay with you a moment, Simon, because again, it's a question for all of you, and you may or may not want to answer this. If there was anything that you really fought for to stay in that might have been at risk of being left out, that actually did stay in the drama. So for you, Simon.
I mean, unlike a lot of shows, Chernobyl, we didn't cut very much at all, right? I'd say what you see on screen, even in the order in which it's shown, is pretty much how it was scripted. So I don't feel that there were many fights in that regard. I mean, I can certainly say. So actually, here's something where I'd say I was at fault, where I didn't fight for it to be in, and I battled with it myself over, is this the right thing? And, you know, and we put it out, and then the response we've had from it, I was like, wow, okay, I'm really glad that, like, that is how it's gone out. And that's the end of episode 5. We have that 7-minute sequence of archive and text, right? I watched that 7-minute sequence, you know, 1,000 times, right? I've read those, and it did certainly get to me a point where I'm like, this is too much, you know, this no one's going to want to sit through this. This is like 10% of the episode is text and an archive. Like, we can't do this. We've got to cut some of this out. And or not even that. I was like, not we've got to cut this out, but I don't know if this is gonna work, right? And the person who was always championing that and never really changed that was definitely the writer Craig Mazin. He was like, no, like it's deserved, it's earned, this is important, we have to put the entire series in context of the reality. This is the moment when we do it. It's a very known device anyway at the end of a real story to have these "this is what happened" captions. So it's not unusual. It was just the amount of them that I was like, wow, is this what we're doing? But I've asked a lot of people since it's gone out, how did you feel about all those captions at the end?
Loved it.
And they were all like, yeah, it's yeah. They wouldn't. They never say, oh yeah, it was a bit long. Like, they were all very happy with that.
I think it worked. Oh, sorry, go on.
I was just going to really quick. I just think it rooted everything at the end to what it was about, and also what it gave to me was the thing about Gorbachev, talking about Gorbachev, and it actually gave me a weird tiny bit of hope at the end of it, because it's a bit like why Dunkirk's such an amazing war film, because again we're going back to talking about people and stuff. What it did for me at the end was it was such a beautifully made drama that it just right at the end just pulled us back, because it's this amazing courtroom scene, which is a very dramatic, cinematic sort of thing. Do you know what I mean? And you could get lost in that, but it allowed people at the end for me to come back and say, this did really, right at the end, this did really happen. This is what happened to these people. This is where they ended up. And I found it in just at the end of it, it topped it off for me. It just pushed the idea of what it was about, and how important a show it was, really. I thought it was amazing, yeah.
So let's stay with you, Dan. And was there something that was in danger of being left out and you fought for?
Oh God, I'm not going to say who fought for it, because I want to go back to series 4. But I would say there was two pieces, 2 moments in episode 4 which were heavily discussed. The first was the scene right at the front with Carolyn sitting in the waiting room. If you remember, right at the front, and she's reading a magazine, waiting to go and see Zoe Wanamaker, who's her boss.
Yeah. And
a little interaction with the guy who's the receptionist, who just looks at her and they look back, and and he waits till she picks up the magazine and then says, you can go in now. And it's just this, and it kind of, I don't think it was scripted. I think it just, I think it just happened on the day. And the guy who turned up just hit the ground running, and he was fantastic. And it was in there, and we actually had it longer for a while. It was, I don't know, about 30, 40 seconds longer between them. And we hummed and hawed, and everyone said, well, do we need it? Don't we need it? It was all that. And every time we watched that, everyone laughed. And we were kind of like, well, then we're laughing at it. We could go straight in. You're absolutely right. But there's these elements, I think, kind of what makes Killing Eve, those moments is yeah, it's not strict, but it's fun and it's characterful and all that sort of stuff. So we all discussed heavily that one, and that remained in. And the other biggie, this is going to be fun, the moment where the girl comes up to Villanelle in Amsterdam when she asked to take the photo, was heavily discussed about whether we should have it or not. Because again, it kind of, in some respects, was it moving the story on? Was it, in those, and Killing Eve's only 42 minutes long. So you've got to be really circumspect with what you've got to be brutal with what you use. And again, that was a discussion, but every time we watched it, everyone just went, just love it. And it went to the heart of Villanelle's character, and stuff. And I think probably out of the series, that's probably the most used GIF in that second series season. So it did resonate. And I think, yeah, those two, I would say.
Elen, you've already mentioned the In the Hands of the Gods is something that came out. What did you have something that you? Okay. Oh, sorry. You mentioned The Hands of the Gods earlier, but was there something specifically that you really wanted in and sort of had a bit of a discussion about it?
Yeah, there was a couple of things that we had discussions about. Episode one, there was a scene in a lecture hall that kind of told you what Sarah's character, what her job was, even though she told Kenzo when she first meets him. And there was a funny line at the end of, it reveals that she's in a lecture hall, but there's nobody in there. She's just practicing her lecture. And she's quite feisty in it. And I really kind of wanted to keep it in at the top because it kind of focused in on her character at the top of the, and we battled quite a lot, but in the end it went. So I didn't win that battle. And then there was in the big montage scene at the end, there was a really funny bit of Charlie Creed Miles as Abbott fighting a guy, and it was brilliant. And but it was one of those things that there's quite a lot of stuff going on in the montage, and we still wanted to keep the narrative flowing and the voiceover, and it was just one of those things that we had to let go of. And it was very sad.
But at the same time, there's some extraordinary things in the series. You mentioned a dance sequence that just flabbergasted me. But also in episode 4, as well as this grand shootout, you do have the audacious thing of having a lengthy flashback with one character followed immediately by another flashback, and it works.
Yeah, I hope so. No, I think it does. I mean, I remember reading the script going, oh my gosh, this is, how are we going to do this? This is going to be, but then I remember when I started putting it together, especially starting with Yuto's story, or was it Yuto's story or Sarah's? I can't remember which one came first. I think it was Yuto's, in Japan. I mean, it comes first in the episode, but I can't remember in terms of the order of shooting. And you're just so drawn in by his character. And I was never bored of watching it. And I think with the Sarah, you had this budding love story with Yuto, and then you had the waning love story with Sarah. And there was just a parallel there. And then it sort of seamlessly then seemed to fall back into Yuto's story and take him from Japan to London and take you back into the big battle, which you'd started with. But like I said, originally there was another scene right at the top, which we thought was just one scene too much. One kind of, because it was on a plane with Kenzo and a guy giving him a big speech about nuclear power, actually. And so I think it was the right decision to move the story forward and to kind of bookend it with a battle. And I'm just trying to think of anything else I battled for, but I mean, there's always little battles. But Julian was brilliant. I mean, he used to say all the time, he would be really always optimistic, and he would say things like, "Take the victory, EPL." He'd say, "Take the victory." So we were like, "Yeah, okay." So we got that victory. So you get one little victory, and then you have to let go of, sometimes your babies. But yeah, there's so much brilliant characters. Sorry, yeah.
No, that's okay. Gary, what about you?
I'm probably not going to disclose what was sort of in and out, but I'm just thinking, one of the things I suppose I've been skewed by is that I've worked for sort of 20 odd years with Armando Iannucci on various projects. And one of the things that he's extraordinary, I mean, he's got a brilliant mind in so many ways, but one of the things that he's fearless in, and I think it's rubbed off eventually with me, is that he just rips things out and he reorders all the time. And the script isn't sacrosanct. You can move things around. You take lines out. You move lines across. He continually is moving things around to find, like in the big jigsaw, to find the right bit to fit. And I try and bring that to every project that I work on, and I'm always trying to think about however tight and good the scripts are, sometimes it can be improved by, sometimes not, by moving things around and the thing that sort of Dan alluded to, that if you're lucky enough to be in an environment where you can be fearless in the way that you attack material, it can be quite liberating to sort of not feel constrained by the script, and you feel like you're allowed to be playful with things and be creative if it needs to be. So many times I'm sure all the other guys will say the same thing. You've got a couple of scenes and you're not sure which order they go in. You try them every which way, and then you start intercutting them, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, we've injected some energy and pace here where it was, and it's it's fun to try and rewrite, because I think we do rewrite to a degree in the cutting room, because you get the script, but then as soon as you see performance on the screen, that is what you lock into, and the words, however good they are, take it on a different life, because it's what the actors are bringing. They bring it to life. And so,
I think that's something that is quite remarkable for anyone who watches Fleabag, and particularly as a great example, that first episode of a second series. Yes, it's extraordinary how that action unfolds in a very tight space, and yet through the editing, I felt that space is opened up. And in a really incredible way. And you've got the elements of screwball comedy in the physical action, but also any great screwball comedy relies on the kind of interrelationship between editing and the delivery of dialogue. And that's something, the speed of which is controlled in that editing. And you can see that so well in the first episode. It also struck me that if you look at all your body of work, working with Armando Iannucci, there's that great scene in The Wire where they only use the F word across one whole scene. It struck me across the whole of your career, you have probably used more versions of the word fuck than any other editor.
Are you allowed to say this? Sorry, are you allowed to say this?
No, you're not. No, it'll be edited out.
Okay, because then I was going to say about the gods. The gods line had the F words in it and I took it out.
Congratulations, Gary.
Yeah, I'm known as, the thick of it. Don't even go there. There was so much of it.
But can I just ask you, Gary, does Phoebe, does she, mind when you take her words out? Because I don't know, I feel like sometimes there's too many words in TV.
No, it's not a case of taking the words out. It's I've said this before. We spent 2.5 days taking out all of her looks to camera, Fleabag's looks to camera in the first episode. To a certain point, and a certain point in the script where that dictated the first look to camera, and she was brave enough to run with it. It didn't work. It was terrible. We all missed it. But, by going through that process, you discover so many other things about, about the nature of that episode you're trying to put through. There's always accidents that happen by pursuing a certain avenue, if you like, and then it might not work, but it's never a cul-de-sac, to continue this terrible because you will find certain junctions that can I'm running out now.
Crossroads.
So the thing is, you're always going to find things that by experimenting. I've been lucky enough to work on shows where swearing has been used in such a creative way that sometimes only the F word will do. One of the things there's 2 jokes with the C word that come to mind, and one of them is in Fleabag, and it's that in the scene, or which episode it is, when she turns up and she's all hungover, and the priest is in the godmother's front room, and the priest says, I can't do it. And she's taking it really, really well. And then she lets him out the door. And then just in the background, she walks out, and you're on Fleabag and you hear godmother go, what a, and it's done. Only Olivia Colman can steal the show from not even in Vision, such a brilliant performance.
It's also something else to say in answer to back taking stuff out. You've got to bear in mind, on average, Killing Eve is 15 minutes over each episode at assembly stage. So there is a natural need to reduce shows anyway.
Whenever I have any conversations with directors, you've got to over. In my book, I've been used to, Armando's stuff. Oh my God, the assemblies for The Thick of It and V were, I mean, Thick of It in particular, they'd often be an hour long, and it's a 28-minute show. So you have to cut half of it out. And so, you take out all the plot to try and get it down to maybe 35 minute.
And then in that time, you don't have any time to kind of like just sit with the characters then? Or do you try and make that time?
You've assembled the hour-long assembly, and then you squeeze it right down. Say if you get it down to half an hour, and you watch it, and it's so fast. And, you keep all the jokes, clearly. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So then it becomes like a game of Edit Jenga, where you've got to sort of rebuild it again. For the story to make sense. And often you squeeze it right down for it to sort of get some sort of structural sense, only then to sort of, if you've got time, let a bit of air out. And so that's a very particular way of working, because I don't know many other people who overwrite and shoot in that way. But there's
But do you find that like, so, when you're I find when I'm editing, when I'm assembling, you use everything and you maybe kind of overcomplicate it, and then when you're fine cutting, there's a simplifying thing that goes on. There's like a shredding. And I guess if
cathartic.
But you think, because when you get scenes, you're getting scenes individually. They're not really part of the story yet, and you're building up.
One of the things I really enjoy about the fine cut is, you get some time to work with the director, and it's the nuance, and this becomes quite difficult to tell anyone who doesn't edit how this works. But you can spend a morning, a day on a scene, and you're dialing up and dialing down. Sometimes it could be, lines or words, and it's just that real sort of micro surgery that doesn't sound like it makes much difference. And then, because the scene was in a pretty good shape anyway, but you spend some time just tinkering, and then you watch it back, and the small differences at that point seem to make such. It's like all the little pieces just fit, and it sounds quite sort of like a weird thing to talk about, but as it is, we sort of get that, right?
Yeah.
Definitely.
It's that tiny micros, and it's working on the nuance, and then you watch it back, and you can see the tiny little differences, and then when that's applied across a whole episode, then that's the bit I like.
I think we're going to have to go to some audience questions, otherwise they'll be sending through profanities to all of us. Just quickly, Janet Orr asks about the Japanese director that you talked about, Ellen, and that's Takeshi Kitano, wasn't it? You were saying.
Yeah.
Sonatine and Hanabi.
Violent Cop. Sonatine's the funny one. It's sort of it's about Yakuza in Tokyo, and then they sort of go on holiday to the beach, and then they just kind of all chill out. It's brilliant. And then he goes back to But it's all that kind of flinching violence, and then it's calm again. And
I've got another question from Esther Betterley. This is for all of you. Which editing software did you use for cutting? Let's start with you, Dan.
Avid.
Ellen.
Yep.
Avid.
Gary.
Avid.
Simon.
Avid, but like there is a reason why we all use Avid. It's like for anyone who
it's good.
It is good, but also it's the one that allows team collaboration in the best way. So like I could be on it, Jinx can be on it. We had an assembly editor on it. We had 2 assistants, music editor. Everyone's on the same project. Everyone can look at the same sequences. There are ways to do that in other editing software, but it's Avid is built for that. And I think that's why any show that's got multiple episodes, any show that's got more than just the editor working on it, you do use Avid for that reason. I think that's right, guys.
Also, I'd like to say, actually, just for budding editors out there, I know quite a lot of students are coming into the industry, or people who are running these courses, and they use Final Cut and Adobe Premiere, which are great. Adobe Premiere is great and Final Cut's brilliant. But then they're coming out of these colleges, and there's kind of summer work for trainees and assistants, and none of them have done Avid. And that's what a lot of drama is cut on. And, it's a shame because we can't offer them jobs because, well, they can go and train on it, but I think it's really important that there's, from the training across to the industry, that there's some sort of, you know, understanding what we're using and how they're going to.
And to that end, like Avid has a free version. There's a version called
Exactly.
Avid,
Yeah, there's a free version.
which uses all the same interface, all the same keyboard commands. If someone wanted to, you know, learn how to use Avid, get familiar with it, that they don't have to spend money. Well, they need the computer, but they don't need to spend money on you know, Adobe Premiere or Final Cut Pro in the same way.
Yeah, and they're good, these systems. They are good, but it's just that because, you know, if you are looking for your first job and you actually haven't been trained on the system, it's quite hard, really, to get into the industry.
Elen, I'm going to stay with you. Again, this is for all of you, but I'll start with you first. Someone sent in the question, do you talk ahead of time about color profiles and how they intersect with mood?
Color profiles?
Yeah.
What do you mean, grading?
I would assume.
I sometimes get really attached to the grading of the brushes. I don't know. Do you guys have that as well?
No. I'm going to be no. This is to my detriment. To my detriment.
Okay.
I'm going to be brilliantly honest, and no. There you go.
Well, no, you don't like the brushes, or no?
No, I love. No. I don't know. I'm so focused on other stuff that I sometimes think it's something I've got to improve on, shall we say. There you go. Because I just don't.
I don't think so, Dan. I think, you know, the most important thing, you know, we know we've got a whole grading process for someone to take that. I mean, DOP Tony Miller, who did a brilliant job on Fleabag, both series. I mean, he was very particular in terms of the LUT that he put on. He wanted the offline rushes to have, and so they came into the cutting room, and it was like, oh, they look lovely already.
Yeah.
You know, when the look got hold of them and then graded them with a great colorist, and you know, it looked at, you know, he then takes it and enhances it. So no, I think like Dan says, it's the performance that we have to worry about,
and the story. Yeah.
And what about you, Simon?
I don't do much with grading in the offline edit. As the guys say, it goes on. We had Jakobad DOP and John Claude who did our grade and did a phenomenal job. I have worked though a lot with one director, a director called Mark Munden, and what he does with the grade is always like so amazing. It blows me away so much. With his grader and his DOPs. We did a series called National Treasure together with Robbie Coltrane in it and Julie Walters, and they literally like pretty much key out every color and then go back in and paint the color in, like almost as if it's like colorized black and white footage, you know, like they'll paint in a skin color on the skin, and they'll paint in like, you know, very vibrant blues and magentas and so on into the backgrounds and stuff like that. So I get quite excited coming out or going in to see the grade when they've done something so adventurous with it. But yeah, in the offline edit, the bit that we do, I don't think the only bit that I would want to ask, actually, Ellen had scenes in black and white, and she had scenes in, you know, very I think there's a whole scene which is just the red light that is within the battle scene, and there's like just
that was on location. That was that was David Odd on location. I mean, a lot of David Odd's, you know, Julian always wanted it to be quite real, but and David Odd's photography is fantastic and it's very much available light. But when we went into the studio, they did a little bit of experimenting, and I think I really loved that light because it gave me a great sound opportunity to put some throbbing sort of security thing going on there, and it was very dramatic on Kenzo's face. So, and it was one shot. That whole scene was just one shot. So that was done in camera, and also actually in the script. I think in the script Joe said, "Oh, when we go to the flashbacks, which was the noirish flashbacks in episode 1 and 2." that he wanted some kind of change of grade. So we did play around a little bit with that. But what we did with that as well was to play around with the format and have CinemaScope and, you know, like a letterbox effect on it as well, on top of having the grading. So we did play around. Actually, we did play around a little bit in the cutting room with it, but I tend to.
I suppose that's the only thing I'd
that.
say, that it's always useful to know the capability that can be got from a grading suite, because it can, you know, inform you how you perhaps creatively can cut a scene or transitions or stuff like that. So it's always good to know what can be done technically, because that can inform a creative decision in the cut.
Yeah, and I also think I sometimes like going into the grades, because I like to. My pet thing is seeing people's eyes. Okay, I've got this thing about seeing people's eyes. You know, so some people might grade a scene and it's all very nice and dark, and I'm going, but I want to see their eyes. So, not that I go in and dictate that, but I do sometimes sit in, and because we used to, as editors, sort of deliver the program, but because of kind of time constraints and economics, we sometimes don't get to go to dubs and grades anymore, but I try and insist that I do go to a grade and try and go to a final mix or a mix review.
I know we're getting near the end of our time. I've got a question from Harry Foster. Again, this is for all of you, and perhaps it might not necessarily be specific to the programs we've been talking about. What's the biggest mistake you've made in the edit suite, and how have you learned from it? Dan.
The biggest mistake I made in the edit suite. Oh wow. Okay. I'll point back. I told this story to the guys on Friday. So very quickly, my first ever viewing of episode 4 in series 1 of Killing Eve, and what happened was I had to swap cutting rooms for the viewing with all the execs, which include Phoebe, Sally, Lee. It's my first ever viewing with them. I was very nervous. I got in very early in the morning because I wanted to make sure the sound was right in a different cutting room. And I obviously got a bit of fat finger and hit a button by mistake. And about 10 minutes into the episode, I got a title card come up, which proceeded to continue for the next 5 minutes. So so my answer to that would be, and also this is largely demonstrates how lovely people they were, in that they all were very polite and very British about it, and just said, "Oh, I don't think that was meant to happen, was it?" And then I had to rush back quickly and change it. But I think it just proves a point about, actually, if you're going to have a viewing with your execs, try not to fiddle with that cut 15, 20 minutes before they're due to come in. That'd be my answer.
Ellen, what about you?
Loads of things. I don't know. I mean, nothing specific, but sometimes I think the biggest thing you learn is how to be diplomatic, and to when to speak and when not to speak in a situation when you're sitting in with execs and in screenings and viewings. And I can't think of anything specific, but I have, been in situations where I've said things.
What about you, Gary?
I think I remember years and years ago, I was working on this docudrama, and I extended the sound. I think I extended it once or twice too many times. And so it meant that where I wanted the sound to go that far, it sort of went that far, and I hadn't realised it. And we were watching back the sequence, and rather fortuitously, it cut to a drama bit, and it was just lucky, because there was a sort of beautiful 16mm stuff was shot on slow-mo, and I think the blood was dripping into a bowl, and it was all beautiful, and the director wanted to rinse all this stuff as much as possible. And then it wasn't planned, but there was a callback, like a bit of sound, an echo of a sound from my mistake of overextending the audio, and it timed perfectly with the drip going into this bowl of water. And I looked at him and he looked at me, and I must have looked really surprised. He said, "That's brilliant. You didn't mean to do that, did you?" And I went, "No, of course not." And it's done.
Simon.
So like a long time ago, even before I was an editor or an edit assistant, when I was like on one of my first productions as a production assistant, the editor very generously like would have me in and would show me stuff, and was being nice to me because I was this young runner that would bring him his lunch and stuff like that. And everyone here will know what a mistake this was. I later was on set and there was one much older actor, and I just made some comment about his performance and how great I thought it was, but I made a comment about his performance. I said something like, "Oh yeah, you were really scary in that scene. It was great." As a runner, it was not my place to tell an actor what their performance was like. It was not helpful to the director. It was not helpful to the actor. It was not helpful to the editor. And luckily, nothing came of it. But the editor at the time, I think he clocked it, or he was there when he heard me say it. And he said, "Simon, don't ever, ever, ever do that again." And I have learned from that, what goes on in the cutting room stays in the cutting room.
To that end, I also lost a whole episode of Spooks for about 2 hours once, which was a locked episode, which wasn't mine as an assistant. And I've never been more scared in my whole life.
Yeah, it's when you used to
found it.
when you used to switch the machine on in the morning and it would say Avid Media offline, and you'd be having a screening like 10 minutes in 10 minutes time with executives, and there'd be Avid Media offline. Everything would be red and be going, okay, where's the stuff?
It was an editor's cut and I completely lost it, and I had to go in and tell him, "I've just lost your locked cut." And I won't name who it is, but he was a very gracious, lovely person, and he sort of said, "Well, I think you better go and find it then, hadn't you?" Fortunately, we're still here.
And we are here because we're actually celebrating your work over the course of last year. So I will ask, I know you've all been nominated and been winning awards over the course of the last few months or so. What's it like for each of you to have been nominated in this category for a BAFTA? Dan, let's start with you.
Well, I think it's the nicest thing ever. I think it's a mark because, as Gary's alluding to, the fact that the BAFTA is for fiction, so you're combining comedy, drama, long-form drama, and that sort of thing. So it feels to me like it's the ultimate. It's different to the Emmys and the like, which are great, but they separate them out. So the very idea that you've got such a wider sort of group that you're sort of in competition with, it's amazing. And I'm just very lucky because I'm pretty early on in my editing career, and I would not have anticipated 5 years ago that I'd be here having this conversation now. So it's just great. There you go.
Ellen.
Well, yeah, I think I'm in, being in really great company and fantastic shows. But I think it's like always, it's always a team effort. And we had a fantastic team on Giri, Haji, and they deserve the award just as much as I do. Joe and Julian and Jane and Chris and all my lovely assistants and everybody, like I'm doing a speech now, no. But I just think it really is a collaboration, and it really is a team. And it was, we had fantastic blueprints of a script, and but I'm really, really pleased, and I'm very grateful and thankful to BAFTA for the nomination.
Simon.
Yeah, all that as well for me.
What about you, Simon?
Well, BAFTAs is the one when you're a kid that you know about, right? Like I actually had no idea what an Emmy was or an Eddie was or an RTS.
An Eddie or an Eddie?
An Eddie.
Yeah. When I was a kid, BAFTAs, you know what that is. So there is something about that. My mum knows what a BAFTA is. My mum didn't know what the others were. So if to be nominated for BAFTA is something nice to tell my mum.
Gary.
Yeah, I mean, like everyone said, I mean, it's the BAFTAs, isn't it? It's what we grew up with, and I suppose it's the ultimate accolade, and everyone likes to get validation for their work, So, I mean, like I said before, also, I feel particularly proud to have got a sort of relatively smaller show up against the bigger beasts. So, it's always nice to get recognised and a pat on the back, So.
And we
there are
have
no small shows. Only small. What do they call? Yeah. What's
we
the
have
quote?
a final prophetic question for all of you. Obviously, the last few months have really shown us how important television is for people, and the way it actually creates a cultural conversation. With that in mind, what do you each see from a creativity perspective as the future for television at the moment? And unfortunately, Dan, I am going to come to you again first.
Can I go first?
Everyone paid me to go after you.
Yeah, I was going to say. I suppose we're talking in our slightly very strange world that we're living and existing in now. I think first and foremost, I personally want to say is I would like people to recognise how important the creative industry is to this country and to the DNA of this country, and going forwards to recognise that and to galvanise that. And you know, it's one of our strengths, and I'd like to see more and more people involved and enjoying that. And I think it's great to see how, you know, seeing that studios are being built everywhere, and there still seems to be a strong a strong desire for the economy, for this industry to grow. And also, very quickly, without saying, we're brilliant. When we were at the Emmys, and Gary's at the Emmys, and Simon, these guys won the awards. We had so many British editors that night there: Katie Whalen, Tim Porter, Crispin Green. You know, so many others there. That I just want the continuation to recognise how great, you know, British craft is in TV.
Simon.
So like awards and all that, it's very nice to pat ourselves on the back and recognize great work that we are doing. One place that like we're doing very badly in the edit community is diversity and having diverse voices. We don't have nearly enough black editors coming through, nearly enough Asian editors coming through, minority ethnic editors coming through. And that is a problem. And, you know, in the wake of like George Floyd murder and Black Lives Matter and stuff like that, there is a lot of discussion about it. There's obviously a lot of discussion at BAFTA about it, at the BFE about it. I hope that we can all take that on board and, you know, encourage and help. And, you know, we want all of it. We've talked about it before, the panelists here. We talked about this in our own like editing guild BFE conversation last week. We want those voices to be part of our community, and if there's anything we can do to encourage that or to, you know, help that, like, please, people should, black people, minority ethnic people, Asian people should feel welcome and desired in editing.
Elen.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Simon. I think diversity in our industry, but also in the content we make in the future. And I think it's focusing on getting back to work, really, because so many people have been out of work in this time, the corona, and a lot of people have been struggling, and to try and help them. And also, for me, the big thing is as well is to support our public service broadcast. Because none of these programs would be made. 3 of the programs were made by public service broadcast, and the other one was made by talent, which was nurtured by public service broadcast. And I think it's really important for us to recognise that they just wouldn't have been made without it, because it doesn't fit into a commercial. Quite a lot of the programs don't fit into a kind of commercial idea of what a drama should be or what television should be, and they're very inventive. So, yeah.
Finally, Gary.
Yeah, it's an unknown quantity, like so many things at the moment. You know, I daily am very thankful that I've managed to work throughout the last few months. But we're on a project that we were missing some scenes because it was locked down. It was shut down in early March with a few days of filming left over. And, you know, I'm very aware of how difficult it is to try and get those days shooting organised before we finish the cut. And, you know, it's very uncertain as to, you know, it's the logistics of filming with all the health and safety measures that are going to have to be taken is where it's unknown, isn't it? So, on the flip side, I've really been very thankful and enjoyed working from home. I mean, I love Soho, but not getting on the train every day has been, and actually I found it very creatively fulfilling, because I'm working longer hours, but actually the great thing is I'm cutting more. I'm not traveling for 2 hours a day. So swings and roundabouts, I suppose. I think that I think more editors will be working from home. I hope so, if the kit can be provided, and so it's difficult. I think from an editing point of view, I think we're quite well cosseted, because we can cut from home, which is fantastic. I think people who are working in other aspects of production, that's the more difficult thing. And I know that obviously so many of our colleagues who are freelancers have found it really difficult during this time, because there's been there's no furlough, and they haven't had their incomes being taken away. So it's a difficult time to know how things will play out.
And also it's hard if you're inviting new people into the industry, even as editors. If we're working from home, then there's none of that, working with new people who can come in and see how you work, and it's very hard.
I'm afraid we have actually come to the end of this session now. There is another session tomorrow on the craft of hair and makeup, and details for that event you can find on the BAFTA website. Also, please do join in the conversation on BAFTA's social channels, and stay tuned for details of where to watch both the British Academy Television Craft Awards and also the Virgin Media British Academy Television Awards. Thanks to everyone who sent in questions this afternoon, and apologies to the many people whose questions we didn't get round to asking. Also thanks to BAFTA for organising this event, and Dana as well for captioning it. And a very special thank you to TCL for their support and their sponsorship of these events, which are really vital for people understanding about the industry. But most of all, I would like to thank our guests today, Dan, Elen, Gary, and Simon, and congratulations to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, BAFTA. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Bye-bye.